Agnes pressed her nose against the glass panel of her small kitchen window, her breath clouding the view of the courtyard below. Through the hazy reflection, she could see the newly planted marigolds drooping in the midday sun. Her neighbor, Stuart, strolled by with his walker, pausing every few steps to wipe sweat from his forehead. This was Millhaven Acres, a senior living complex that prided itself on comfort and community. Despite her initial delight at the complex's tree-lined paths and renovated rec hall, Agnes couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hush that fell over the place whenever the name Fairfield was mentioned, Fairfield being a nursing home in a neighboring county that had recently endured a deadly viral outbreak, made her uneasy. Last week, one of Millhaven Acres' part-time nurses, Patricia, had quietly circulated flyers about practicing caution. They were bright yellow, with big letters at the top reading, "Alert, Potential Risk," citing the recent outbreak in other senior facilities across the state. By the next morning, the flyers were gone. The official statement from the Homeowners Association, HOA, arrived soon after, printed on fancy stationery. No cause for alarm. Millhaven Acres remains safe. At first, Agnes wanted to believe them. The members of the HOA board, folks like Harriet Thorne, the board's president, had run a tight ship since she'd moved in 3 years ago. They held monthly socials, organized landscaping crews, and sent birthday cards to everyone. Still, Harriet's brand of control felt more like a suffocating presence than true care. She had a way of overseeing everything from the color of door wreaths to how many times you ran your laundry machine in a week. And now, apparently, she oversaw which health warnings were posted or removed. Meanwhile, a rumor began circulating among the residents. People whispered about a woman on the second floor who had come down with fever and a strange rash. Her name was Louise, and although no official notice was given, word spread that she'd been taken to the hospital at dawn. Agnes tried calling Harriet for answers, but each call went to voicemail. Then she tried another board member, Maurice, who picked up on the second ring only to murmur, "We're looking into it," before abruptly hanging up. That same evening, Millhaven Acres was rocked by another piece of alarming news. A second resident, Stanley, was found unresponsive in his room. Paramedics took him away, but nobody seemed to know more. The entire complex felt like it had a silent question mark hanging over it. Were these medical emergencies connected? Agnes recalled the alert flyers Patricia had posted. Was the potential risk now a reality? The following day, a hastily organized meeting was called in the rec hall. Rows of chairs faced a small podium. Harriet stood there, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, tapping her microphone. She gave a thin-lipped smile. In her hand was a neat stack of papers, presumably containing carefully orchestrated talking points. Before Harriet even spoke, Agnes felt an uneasy chill. She recognized the way Harriet's lips curved whenever she was about to dismiss an issue as overblown. "Good afternoon, everyone," Harriet began, scanning the room as though she expected applause. "We understand that recent events have caused concern. We want to assure you that everything is under control. Yes, 2 residents have been hospitalized, but we have no confirmation that it's the same illness reported at Fairfield." Agnes noticed many confused faces among the audience. Some of her neighbors gripped the edges of their chairs, looking for any scrap of solid information. Harriet, however, was determined to keep the message on lockdown. "Please avoid panic," Harriet continued. "Millhaven Acres has extremely high health standards. We disinfect communal areas daily. Our staff is vigilant. This is merely a coincidence, and we encourage everyone to go about their daily routines. Rest assured, the board remains in close contact with local health officials." The meeting concluded without taking a single question from the residents. As Harriet left the podium, her phone buzzed on the lectern. She snatched it up and quickly ended the call, offering only an apologetic smirk to those who approached her. Agnes, feeling thoroughly unsettled, followed Harriet out into the hallway, hoping to catch her for just a moment. But Harriet vanished behind the staff-only door, and that was that. In the hallway, Patricia stood with her arms crossed. She caught Agnes's eye, shook her head disapprovingly, and mouthed, "Something's not right." Agnes approached her, Pat, do you know what's going on? Is this just pneumonia? Flu? Or that new virus we've been hearing about? Patricia's eyes darted around. I'm sorry, Agnes, she whispered. I can't say much. The board doesn't want the staff spreading panic. But I'm worried. They took down all my flyers. I've been seeing people with unusual symptoms. Bruises on their arms without injuries, fevers that spike suddenly, coughs that sound bad. I asked Harriet if we could get an infectious disease specialist to visit, but she said there's no room in the budget. It's not looking good. Agnes's stomach churned. She remembered her late husband's words before he passed. Never let other people's silence become your own. In that moment, she promised herself she'd get to the bottom of this, come what may. But she had no idea just how high the stakes would become, or how tightly the HOA board would hold on to its secrets. That night, Agnes found herself struggling to sleep. The overhead fan circled lazily, pushing stale air around her bedroom. Echoes of Harriet's speech rattled in her mind. Those placating words offered no real substance. She decided if she couldn't find rest, she'd find answers. She threw on a robe, slipped her feet into the furry slippers her granddaughter had bought her last Christmas, and tiptoed out into the dimly lit hallway. The building was eerily quiet. Normally, a handful of residents might be up late watching TV in the lounge or playing cards, but tonight, every door was shut tight. A small sliver of light leaked from the door at the end of the hall, the meeting room used by the HOA board. Agnes crept closer and heard muffled voices. She pressed her ear to the gap. Cannot let them find out, someone hissed. Agnes recognized Harriet's voice. We already have 2 fatalities. Stanley never made it to the hospital. They found him DOA, Maurice replied, sounding panicked. If we don't notify the health department, and this gets traced back. Stop being so dramatic, Harriet snapped. There's no proof it's the same virus. We need to preserve the property value here. If word gets out, we'll have a quarantine on our hands. Buyers will back out. Our budgets will collapse. Do you want a scandal? We keep it quiet for now. Agnes stifled a gasp. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart thud. Multiple deaths? The official notice had only mentioned 2 hospitalizations. She took a step back, dizzy with the realization that Harriet and the board were burying crucial information. She hurried back to her apartment, locked the door behind her, and leaned against it, exhaling in sharp bursts. A wave of anger battled with her dread. They were so concerned about property values that they were willing to gamble with lives. For a moment, Agnes felt powerless. Who would listen to her, an elderly resident with no official title? After a few calming breaths, she recalled that she'd once been a teacher. She was used to advocacy, fighting for her students, guiding them, protecting them when parents or administrators overlooked something important. It was time to channel that resolve again. She decided to call a friend on the outside, her nephew, Graham, who worked as a freelance journalist. If no one here would listen, maybe he could. In the morning, Agnes dialed Graham's number and left a voicemail. Something's happening at Millhaven Acres. Residents are sick, some have died, and the HOA board is covering it up. Please call me as soon as you can. But Graham wasn't the only call she made. Next, she phoned the local health department. The automated system asked her to leave a message, and she did, explaining in as calm a tone as possible what she'd learned. Though she wasn't sure if anyone would believe her, she felt a slight relief in having taken action. Later that day, she found Patricia in the corridor, distributing medication to a resident. Once the resident's door shut, Agnes quickly relayed to Patricia what she'd overheard. The nurse's face paled. I had no idea Stanley passed away. I mean, we suspected he was bad off, but Harriet strictly told us it was all an overreaction. Patricia paused, her expression steeling. We can't stay silent anymore. This place might become the next Fairfield. They decided to share their concerns with a few trusted neighbors, hoping they could form a small group of watchers, quietly documenting any suspicious illnesses or board actions. They recruited Rose, a retired librarian with a sharp mind for detail, Demetrius, a retired Air Force medic who kept files on everything, and Charles, who'd once served as the local community center director and knew how to handle emergencies. Over the next 2 days, their group grew more convinced that an outbreak was brewing. Residents complained of headaches, nausea, and unexplained bruising. Some said they'd lost all sense of taste and smell. Others had trouble breathing. The board, however, remained tight-lipped, chalking up these ailments to the flu or age-related issues. On the third morning, a note appeared under every door, courtesy of Harriet. We regret to inform you that an illness has affected a few residents. Out of an abundance of caution, we will temporarily restrict visitations and large gatherings until the situation is fully assessed. The wording was gentle, almost comforting. But as Agnes read between the lines, she noticed Harriet was still downplaying the threat. Within hours, a string of rumored cases lit up the gossip chain like wildfire. Some insisted it was a new strain of pneumonia. Others speculated it was the virus from Fairfield that had jumped county lines. A few conspiracy-minded folks believed it was a side effect of the newly installed wireless router system in the lounge. Truth remained elusive, but the fear was real. By midday, someone from aboard tried to reassure the residents by distributing small bottles of hand sanitizer. The cheap ones that smelled overly strong, like pure alcohol with a hint of lemon. As Agnes accepted her bottle, she noticed Harriet at the end of the hallway, speaking with a county official on the phone, her brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. Harriet gestured wildly, as though trying to keep the official from making a move. That evening, a new rumor swirled. The county might actually declare a lockdown on Millhaven Acres. Some said it would be an official quarantine, complete with armed security to prevent residents from leaving or outsiders from entering. Others speculated they'd just limit large gatherings. But for many inside these walls, the difference hardly mattered. The point was, the board's attempt to keep the outbreak a secret was failing. Forces larger than Harriet Thorne were closing in. Still, Harriet clung to her illusions of control. In an emergency board announcement posted in the lobby, she declared, "Everything is manageable. We ask residents to remain calm, stay in their apartments as much as possible, and refrain from contacting outside media. Let's handle this internally and remain a strong, united community." But for Agnes and her small coalition, the time for internal hush-hush was long gone. By the following morning, the corridors of Millhaven Acres hummed with tension. A local news van was parked just outside the gated entrance, its satellite dish aimed skyward. The team inside was barred from entering, but they filmed interviews with residents who braved the courtyard. Harriet, furious at the intrusion, posted a security volunteer near the main gate, a retiree with shaky hands and a stern expression. The local health department had finally responded to Agnes's message. Though the official's tone had been frustratingly non-committal, "We're aware of some incidents at your facility. We're assessing the need for intervention. Thank you for your concern." For most of that day, the residents found themselves in limbo. The board refused to confirm how many people had fallen ill or whether rumors of multiple deaths were true. No one seemed to know if the county would impose a full lockdown. Some residents tried to arrange rides out of Millhaven Acres, but Harriet insisted that leaving was not an option for their own safety. Patricia had gone silent for a few days, which worried Agnes deeply. Late that evening, Patricia finally appeared at Agnes's door, looking exhausted. "I've been in a makeshift infirmary," she explained. "They're having me take shifts around the clock because more people are getting sick and we're understaffed. It's not just a few cases anymore, it's dozens." A cold shiver gripped Agnes. "Are there any doctors?" "One. We have a volunteer physician from the county, but Harriet convinced them not to blow this out of proportion. He's here only as a consultant," Patricia said, using air quotes. "He's trying to collect samples to send to the lab, but the board claims they're in the process of sending them. He thinks it might be a rare respiratory virus with neurological symptoms, but he can't confirm without proper testing." Agnes swallowed hard. People were suffering behind closed doors, and Harriet was still trying to manage spin. The next morning, that spin unraveled. A public health official arrived in a marked car, stepping out with a clipboard and a team of 2 nurses in protective gear. In the courtyard, Harriet confronted them in an animated exchange, but the official stood firm, pointing at the main building. Harriet grudgingly led them inside. What followed was a tense inspection. The health official visited each floor, asked for medical records, and interviewed sick residents. Agnes peered from her doorway as the official passed by, nodding politely but hurriedly. The stony look on his face suggested the situation was more severe than Harriet had let on. By noon, the official convened a short-notice meeting in the rec hall. Only a small group of representatives from the board and staff were present. The door was shut, security posted, no press or residents allowed. After half an hour, the official and his team stormed out, refusing Harriet's attempt at small talk. "We'll be in touch," he said curtly. Later that evening, word spread like wildfire. The county was ordering a quarantine. Effective immediately, no one was allowed to leave or enter Millhaven Acres without official authorization. Security personnel, real ones, not Harriet's shaky volunteer, were expected to arrive by morning. A mix of dread and relief washed over the community. Some felt safer knowing resources might come. Others felt trapped, as though the entire complex had become a disease-ridden prison. Agnes gathered with her small group, Patricia, Rose, Demetrius, and Charles, in her living room. They sat in a circle, masked and distanced, each wearing latex gloves. The hum of an air purifier in the corner did little to dispel the thick tension. "Harriet's going to try to spin this," Rose said, wringing her hands. "She'll say it's for our own good, but the truth is she ignored every warning. And we all saw this coming." Demetrius frowned. "She did more than ignore it. She actively hid the facts. That's not just negligence, it's criminal." Charles nodded. "But how do we hold her accountable from inside this quarantine? We can't just call the local TV station and have them waltz in." Patricia took a shaky breath. "We got to get the word out somehow. People are dying here. Some have no families to notice if they vanish. Others have relatives states away who only know what Harriet's sanitized newsletters say. We have to push for external help, proper medical teams, hospital transfers if needed." Agnes looked at them all. "We have one advantage. Harriet thinks we're just a bunch of seniors who will obey or get confused. She underestimates us. If she's tampering with medical records, we document the truth. If she tries to control communication, we find a workaround. We're not powerless." The next day dawned under the shadow of a newly placed barricade at the front gate. A uniformed county security officer stood there. Harriet hovered nearby, maintaining a veneer of authority. But the official presence signaled that final decisions were no longer hers alone. Inside the walls, the complex felt even more claustrophobic. Hallways were dotted with impromptu hand sanitizing stations and caution tape across certain common areas. The rec hall was closed to all but essential activities, turning it into a partial triage space. All socials, card games, and potlucks were canceled. Despite the rising body count, quietly hushed by Harriet, the board's stance was that things would have been worse without their leadership. Over dinners delivered to their doors in styrofoam containers, residents whispered stories of how Harriet had refused help from outside agencies until it was too late. Agnes found it harder each day not to lash out openly. She longed to stand up in the courtyard and scream the truth for everyone to hear. But she also recognized that Harriet still held influence and that direct confrontation might risk them being labeled troublemakers, possibly cutting off the fragile channels to help they did have. At the same time, Agnes couldn't help noticing that Harriet herself looked increasingly frazzled. She wore more makeup to cover dark circles under her eyes, and her once perfectly pressed outfits were now rumpled. Every day, Harriet checked in with the county official, who had set up a makeshift office in the lounge, probably to keep an eye on the outbreak. Harriet always left those briefings looking harassed, as though the weight of her lies was beginning to crush her. The question remained, how many more would suffer or die before the truth fully surfaced? And would it be too late by then? During the early mornings, a series of frantic phone calls jolted the complex into a new level of worry. The official lab results had returned. The pathogen was indeed related to the Fairfield outbreak, a fast-mutating virus causing respiratory distress, neurological symptoms, and complications in people with pre-existing conditions. For seniors, it was especially lethal. County Emergency Management set up a perimeter around Millhaven Acres, with signs indicating a quarantine zone. New barricades went up, restricting even foot traffic. Delivery trucks dropped off supplies at a checkpoint, where gloved and masked volunteers transported them into the complex. News helicopters occasionally hovered overhead, capturing aerial footage of the shuttered buildings and cordoned-off courtyards. Inside, the toll was accelerating. Patricia confided in Agnes that, unofficially, the death count had risen to 7. Officially, Harriet was still insisting on calling it a handful of cases. Frustration boiled in Patricia's voice. We have nowhere near the right resources to handle this. The doctor here is pulling his hair out. We're running low on oxygen tanks, protective equipment, everything. And Harriet keeps telling us to keep it internal so we don't alarm the community. Agnes was at her wit's end. She sat in her living room with Rose, sifting through old phone directories, trying to find a more direct line to the state health department or even a bigger news outlet. They're screening calls at the front desk, Rose noted, so we can't just dial out freely anymore. That's why we need a different approach, Agnes said. My nephew Graham still hasn't called back, probably busy or on assignment. But maybe we can leave a message that's too big to ignore. As they spoke, Patricia burst into the apartment. The board is imposing a new measure, she said breathlessly. They're claiming that for safety reasons, we have to remain in our units at all times, except for emergency medical care. No hallway wandering, no courtyard walks. Rose's lips tightened. They're forcing us into total isolation. And Harriet's justifying it under the quarantine, Patricia continued. But we both know she's worried about controlling the narrative. She doesn't want people gathering in corners, whispering about her negligence. Agnes set her jaw. Then we need to act now? If we wait any longer, they'll have total control. That night, the complex was quieter than ever. No TV chatter leaking from under doors. No late-night phone calls echoing in hallways. It felt like the entire building held its breath. But Agnes and her small coalition had a plan. They would meet in one of the lesser-used stairwells, under the cover of darkness, to consolidate the evidence they gathered. At midnight, they rendezvoused in the faint glow of a lone emergency light. Demetrius had brought notes detailing each case he was aware of, gleaned from speaking with families and staff. Patricia showed the official guidelines that Harriet had ignored, suggestions from the county to limit group activities weeks before it got this bad. Charles produced emails from Harriet's account that he'd managed to copy after Harriet accidentally left her laptop unattended in the rec hall. In them, Harriet explicitly told board members to disregard negative press and quietly push forward with normal operations. They compiled these materials into a sealed manila envelope. If we can get this to someone outside who can blow the whistle, Agnes said, we might get more robust help in here and hold Harriet accountable. The question was how to smuggle it out. The perimeter was guarded. Harriet's volunteer watch was replaced by a county guard who carefully monitored anything leaving or entering. Rose had the idea to tuck the envelope in with their meal delivery returns, but that was too risky. Harriet had ordered that all deliveries be inspected before leaving the premises. As they debated, Charles spoke up. Remember Javier, that young nurse's aide who only started last month? He still has off-site privileges because he doesn't live here. If we trust him, maybe he can slip it out for us. Patricia nodded. He's good people. I've seen how upset he is about the board's actions. I think he'll help. They decided that Patricia would approach Javier discreetly. If he agreed, they'd pass the envelope to him to deliver to the local news station or the state health department, whichever would respond faster. By the end of that clandestine meeting, the group felt a flicker of hope. Yet they also knew time was against them. Patricia reported that the makeshift infirmary was overflowing with patients. People were showing signs of confusion, high fevers, and some were failing to respond to basic treatments. Without adequate hospital support, more lives would be lost. While leaving the stairwell, Agnes glimpsed a figure at the far end of the corridor. Was it Harriet, or perhaps a board loyalist? She held her breath, but the figure slipped away into the darkness. Whether they'd been seen or not remained unclear. The next morning, Harriet patrolled the first floor, checking that each resident was confined to their unit. Agnes stood behind her door, listening to Harriet's clipped footsteps pass by. She sensed that Harriet was starting to suspect something bigger was happening among the residents. Sure enough, by midday, Harriet posted a new notice on everyone's door. It is imperative for public health that all confidential documents remain within Millhaven Acres until authorized release. Violation of this directive could result in legal action. It didn't mention the board's name or the specifics, but it was obviously a desperate attempt to muzzle any data leaks. Javier's chance came at dusk during a shift change. He texted Patricia that he was ready. Patricia quickly delivered the envelope to him in an empty hallway, wrapped inside a folded towel so no one would suspect. Javier gave a determined nod and tucked it beneath his scrubs. As the night wore on, Agnes sat in her living room, lights low, half fearing a knock on the door from Harriet's enforcers. Though Harriet technically had no official enforcers, her intimidation had grown so real that it felt as though she did. Sleep was impossible. She replayed the moment Javier slipped out the gate, hoping fervently that he'd make it to the news station and that someone would listen. Then, just after midnight, an alarm blared through the corridors, an emergency lockdown announcement. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that due to suspected sabotage, all exits were sealed. Agnes's phone buzzed with a text from Rose. They found out Javier left with something. Harriet's furious. She's locked the building from the inside. Agnes's stomach sank. Now, it was all or nothing. The envelope was out, but Harriet's last-ditch measures might be enough to keep them forcibly quiet until outside intervention arrived. Would it come soon enough? For a tense 2 days, the building remained under Harriet's version of a total lockdown. County personnel outside had no clue of Harriet's restrictive commands indoors. From their perspective, the quarantine was standard procedure. Harriet, though, had gone full authoritarian. Residents were ordered to remain silent about sensitive matters, and anyone seen wandering halls without a medical reason was threatened with fines or eviction. An empty threat, but frightening enough for many. Inside the infirmary, Patricia fought to keep up with the flood of patients. She saw the heartbreak in real time. Neighbors who once greeted each other warmly in the lounge now lay side by side, many unable to breathe without supplemental oxygen. By her estimate, more than a dozen had died since the outbreak began, far higher than the official board statements, which still claimed only a few tragic fatalities. In the hush of the quarantined rooms, rumors flew that Harriet herself had started showing early signs of illness. Some said she was coughing incessantly, though she insisted it was just seasonal allergies. Agnes had not seen Harriet since the lockdown escalated, but there were whispers that Harriet locked herself in her office, combing through paperwork, shredding documents, barking orders via phone. In the small hours of the third morning, Agnes awoke to the shriek of sirens outside. Flashing lights bled through the edges of her curtains. She peered out to see a caravan of vehicles, several ambulances, a county emergency vehicle, and a news van. A tall figure in a hazmat suit approached the gate, gesturing for it to open. Soon, pounding footsteps echoed through the corridors. Official voices rang out. Emergency medical team, please remain in your units until further notice. Agnes's heart soared with cautious relief. Outside help was finally here, likely spurred by whatever Javier had delivered. Sure enough, the official in charge of the emergency team announced via intercom that they'd received credible evidence of severe mismanagement within the board. They were here to evacuate critical patients, fully assess the complex, and possibly remove the board from decision-making authority. Behind the official's calm tone, Agnes heard steel determination. Within hours, stretchers were wheeled in and out, carrying those in dire need of hospital care. The hallways bustled with masked responders conducting quick health checks on residents. Harriet's grand illusions of control had cracked wide open. Agnes, stepping into the hallway with the county nurse's permission, caught sight of Harriet slumped on a nearby bench, masked and wheezing. Two stern-faced officials questioned her while another official leafed through a stack of board documents. Harriet shot Agnes a venomous glare but said nothing. Later that morning, Patricia found Agnes near the courtyard door, tears of relief in her eyes. They're clearing stable residents, starting with those who show minimal symptoms, Patricia explained. We'll have to stay in quarantine, but at least we can get proper medical oversight. The board is losing its grip. During the chaos, Agnes spotted her nephew Graham among a small press group gathered outside the building. She waved to him through the window, and he flashed a thumbs up, mouthing, "We got your message." Agnes smiled, a lump in her throat. They had done it. The truth was out, no matter how Harriet had tried to bury it. Over the next 48 hours, a large-scale evacuation took place. The most vulnerable were moved to a nearby field hospital. Those with mild or no symptoms stayed behind under strict but professionally managed quarantine protocols. Gone were the hollow reassurances from Harriet's pamphlets. In their place stood real medical professionals, transparent updates, and a sense of communal relief. Once the immediate crisis eased, investigators launched inquiries into the board's response. Harriet's refusal to acknowledge early warnings, along with evidence she concealed medical data, placed her under the glare of serious legal scrutiny. A few days after the evacuation, Harriet was removed from the premises entirely, accompanied by 2 stern-faced county deputies. In the aftermath, Millhaven Acres became a case study in what happens when mismanagement meets apathy. But from the ashes of crisis rose a more cooperative spirit among the survivors. The seniors banded together to support one another, delivering care packages, sharing contact details of loved ones, and writing letters to state officials about the need for oversight in senior communities. Agnes found herself at an impromptu memorial in the courtyard, where small pictures of the deceased were lined up near the marigolds. Once drooping and neglected, now watered by volunteers who'd come from outside charities. She paused in front of Stanley's photo and murmured a quiet goodbye. Behind her, Patricia and the others lit candles, their flickering glow a testament to lives lost and a warning for the future. A local reporter with a camera crew approached Agnes, microphone in hand. She asked Agnes if she was open to sharing her story. Agnes agreed, and, in front of the rolling camera, recounted the days of hidden alerts, hushed-up deaths, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Her words carried the weight of all who had suffered under the board's negligence. "This shouldn't have happened," Agnes said, her voice cracking. "We had warnings. We had a duty to protect our elders. We must ensure that no senior community or any community is ignored when red flags appear. If you see something, speak out, even if those in power say otherwise." When the interview concluded, Agnes felt both drained and oddly at peace. The HOA's attempts to stifle reality had failed, and though the losses were devastating, the survivors were determined to remember, so that future generations wouldn't repeat these mistakes. That evening, as a gentle breeze swept through the courtyard, Agnes joined Patricia and Rose on a bench, watching distant ambulance lights fade from the sky. They were battered, but not broken. Around them, pockets of conversation spoke of both mourning and resilience. And though the quarantine still loomed for many, the real threat, that of negligence and deception, was finally laid bare. Harriet Thorne's name was already spoken in hushed tones, her legacy now tied to a scandal no one in Millhaven Acres would soon forget. But Agnes, looking up at the waning sun, found hope in the simple fact that even in isolation, they were no longer alone. The walls that had once trapped them were now penetrated by the promise of outside help and accountability. Millhaven Acres would heal, though scars would remain. In time, new leadership would emerge, a board committed to transparency and well-being. For Agnes, it was enough to know that she and her friends had stood up against the silence, refusing to be complicit in the lies. They had honored the memory of those lost, ensuring their stories would not vanish in a corporate spin. They had turned an isolated senior complex into a nationwide cautionary tale, a beacon of reform for senior living communities everywhere. The end.